Welcome to World of Sleepcraft. Tonight we journey through the complete story of Legion, the sixth expansion of World of Warcraft, and the culmination of a conflict that began before Azeroth itself was formed. This is the tale of the Burning Legion's third and greatest invasion, of heroes who fell and heroes who rose, of a demon hunter's redemption and a dark titan's imprisonment. Settle in, get comfortable, and let this epic saga unfold before you. Our story begins in the aftermath of Warlords of Draenor with the defeat of Archimonde at Hellfire Citadel. The Demon Lord fell in the twisting nether, his death final and absolute. But in his last moments, Archimonde performed one final act of service to his master. He hurled Gul'dan, the orc warlock who had served the Legion so faithfully, through a portal to Azeroth. Gul'dan tumbled through dimensional space, his body racked by energies beyond mortal comprehension. The transit between worlds was not meant for mortal flesh, and even one as steeped in fey magic as Gul'dan felt the strain of the passage. His bones creaked, his skin burned with eldritch fire, and his mind was assaulted by visions of the countless realities that existed in the spaces between spaces. When he emerged, he found himself not on the Draenor he knew, but on a world he had only heard about in demonic whispers. Azeroth, the prize that the Burning Legion had sought for countless millennia. The world that had twice repelled their invasion. The world that contained a sleeping titan within its core. Gul'dan knew the value of what lay beneath his feet. The Legion had explained it to him in great detail during his corruption on the alternate Draenor. Azeroth was not merely a world, but a vessel, a shell containing a nascent titan of almost unimaginable potential. When this titan awoke, if it awoke uncorrupted, it would be the most powerful force in the cosmos. It would have the strength to challenge even Sargeras himself. This was why the Legion had invested so much effort in claiming Azeroth, not for its mortal inhabitants who were beneath notice, but for the prize that slumbered within. If Sargeras could corrupt the world soul before it awoke, he would gain an ally of godlike power. If he could not corrupt it, he would destroy it, denying such a weapon to any who might oppose his crusade. Gul'dan understood his role in this cosmic drama. He was not a conqueror or a general. He was a key, sent to unlock a door that had been sealed for too long. His masters had given him specific instructions, specific targets, specific promises of power if he succeeded, and specific threats of torment if he failed. The warlock was not alone in this strange land. The Legion had given him a mission, a purpose that would prove his worth to his demonic masters. He was to find a way to bring the Legion to Azeroth in full force, to open a gateway that would allow an army of demons to pour through and finally claim the world they had so long coveted. But first, he needed to understand this world. He needed allies, resources, and most importantly, he needed to locate a specific prize that the Legion desired above all others, the body of Illidan Stormrage. Gul'dan's first destination was a place of ancient power and terrible history. The tomb of Sargeras rose from the waters of the Great Sea, a crumbling edifice that had once been the Temple of Elune, the most sacred site of the ancient Kaldori Empire. In the golden age of Night Elf civilization, this temple had been a place of healing and worship, where the light of the moon goddess shone brightest. Priestesses had tended to the sick and dying, had performed sacred rituals under the stars, had communed with Elune herself in dreams, and visions. 10,000 years ago, during the War of the Ancients, this temple had been corrupted by the Legion's first invasion. Queen Ashara, whose vanity had led her to open communications with Sargeras, had turned the sacred site into something terrible. The High Priestess herself had been transformed, had willingly abandoned the goddess she once served for the promise of the Dark Titan's favor. The temple had become a gateway for demonic forces, and it was here that Sargeras himself had attempted to enter Azeroth. The battle that raged within those walls had been among the most desperate of that ancient war. Heroes whose names were now legend had fought against impossible odds, had matched their mortal strength against beings of cosmic power. The dragon's soul had been unleashed, the well of eternity had been destroyed, and the world itself had broken apart in the cataclysm that followed. The sundering that ended that war had cast the temple beneath the waves, but it had not destroyed it. The guardian Egwin, greatest of the Tirisfal line, had later used it as a tomb for the avatar of Sargeras after she defeated him in single combat. She had sealed his remains within the deepest chambers, hoping that the ocean depths would keep his corruption contained forever. But nothing that involves Sargeras remains buried. The tomb had risen from the sea during the Second War, when the original Gul'dan of the Prime Timeline had sought the power within. That Gul'dan had died in the attempt, torn apart by the demons he had unleashed. His skull remained within the tomb, an artifact of terrible power that had passed through many hands over the years. Now a new Gul'dan approached the tomb with different intentions. He did not seek the skull or the Avatar's power. He sought the Eye of Aman'Thul, a Titan artifact hidden within the structure's depths. More importantly, he sought to reopen the portal that had once allowed the Legion to nearly claim Azeroth. The seals that Egwin had placed upon the tomb were powerful, but Gul'dan had the backing of beings who had been breaking seals since before the Titans ordered the universe. But before he could attempt the tomb itself, Gul'dan needed to complete another task. The Legion had provided him with information about a prison hidden in the Broken Isles, a vault maintained by the Wardens where the most dangerous creatures on Azeroth were kept. Among the prisoners was the body of Illidan Stormrage, the betrayer, the demon hunter who had been slain years ago in the Black Temple. The Legion wanted Illidan's body. They had plans for it, plans that Gul'dan did not fully understand, but was eager to fulfill. His masters had promised him power beyond imagination if he succeeded. They had also made clear what would happen if he failed. The Vault of the Wardens was a prison, unlike any other on Azeroth. Carved into the stone of a remote island in the Broken Isles, it held creatures that were too dangerous to kill and too powerful to let roam free. The architecture itself was a masterwork of security, every corridor designed to funnel intruders into kill zones, every cell reinforced with wards that could contain beings of cosmic power. The prisoners within represented the accumulated threats of 10,000 years of Night Elf history, demons who had survived the War of the Ancients and could not be truly destroyed, renegade mages whose experiments had crossed into forbidden territory, creatures from the deep places of the world who had challenged the Night Elves' dominion over Kalimdor. Each prisoner required specialized containment, and the Wardens had developed expertise in restraining every conceivable type of threat. The Wardens who maintained it were the elite guardians of Night Elf society, dedicated to ensuring that the worst threats to the world remained contained. They were not simply jailers, but warrior priests, combining martial prowess with deep knowledge of the creatures they guarded. Each warden trained for decades before being allowed to serve in the vault, learning the weaknesses of every prisoner and the procedures for every emergency. Maiev Shadowsong led the Wardens, a position she had held since the imprisonment of Illidan's storm rage 10,000 years ago. She had hunted Illidan across Outland after his escape, had finally cornered him in the Black Temple, had watched as adventurers struck him down, and then she had claimed his body, bringing it back to the vault so that his spirit would serve eternal penance for his crimes. She had placed him in the deepest cell, surrounded by wards and guards, and every protection the Wardens could devise. She had sworn that he would never trouble the world again. Gul'dan did not care about her oaths. The warlock approached the vault with an army at his back. Demons poured from portals he had opened, overwhelming the outer defenses before the Wardens could mount a proper response. But he did not rely solely on brute force. He had a weapon that proved even more effective than demon hordes. Cordana Felsong had once been a warden, one of Maiev's most trusted lieutenants. She had traveled to Draenor with the expedition that pursued the Iron Horde, had served Khadgar faithfully during the campaign against Gul'dan. But somewhere in that service, something had changed. The Legion's whispers had found purchase in her mind. She had begun to doubt, to question, to consider alternatives. When Archimond hurled Gul'dan through the portal, Cordana had gone with him. She served the warlock now, her knowledge of the vault's defenses proving invaluable. She guided the demons through passages the Wardens had thought secret, disabled wards that should have held for centuries, opened doors that were supposed to remain sealed forever. The Wardens fought desperately, but they were overwhelmed. Those who could not escape were slain or captured. Those who escaped did so only by releasing other prisoners to cause chaos, hoping that the demons would be distracted by new threats. Among those released were the demon hunters. The decision to release the Illidari was not made lightly. The Wardens had sworn to keep these dangerous beings contained forever, had believed that their fail-touched powers made them nearly as dangerous as the demons they claimed to fight. The debate among the surviving Wardens was fierce, conducted in whispers, while demons raged through the corridors above them. Some argued that the demon hunters were too dangerous, that releasing them might trade one threat for another. They pointed to the atrocities committed by Illidan and his followers in Outland, to the blood that stained the hands of every Illidari. These were not misunderstood heroes, but willing servants of darkness, warriors who had embraced demonic power and could never be fully trusted. Others argued that the situation was already lost, that the only hope of saving anyone lay in unleashing every possible weapon against the Legion. The demon hunters had proven themselves effective against demonic forces. Their methods might be distasteful, but they worked. In a choice between certain death and uncertain alliance, the practical choice was clear. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. With demons pouring through the vault and wardens falling by the dozens, Maiev authorized the release of prisoners who might fight against the Legion. The cells were opened, the wards were dropped, and the Illidari emerged into a world that had changed dramatically since their imprisonment. The demon hunters did not pause to gloat or demand apologies. They understood immediately what was happening, assessed the tactical situation with the cold efficiency that their training had instilled, and began fighting their way toward the surface. Some sought to rescue their master, not knowing that Gul'dan had already claimed Illidan's body. Others simply sought escape, intending to continue their war against the Legion from whatever position they could establish. It was a gamble that would reshape the war to come. The Illidari were Illidan's elite warriors, men and women who had sacrificed everything to become living weapons against the burning Legion. They had gouged out their own eyes and replaced them with demonic sight. They had bound demons to their souls, gaining power at the cost of eternal internal struggle. They had trained in the arts of fell magic and martial combat until they were among the deadliest beings on Azeroth. The creation of the demon hunters had been Illidan's greatest innovation in the war against the Legion. He understood that conventional warriors, no matter how skilled, would always be at a disadvantage against demonic forces. The demons drew power from the twisting nether, an infinite well of chaos that fueled their abilities. To fight them effectively required power drawn from the same source. Illidan had consumed the skull of Gul'dan during the Third War, absorbing the demonic energies within and transforming himself into a demon hybrid. The experience had been agonizing, nearly destroying him, but it had also given him abilities that no mortal could match. He decided to create warriors who had undergone similar transformations, who had willingly embraced demonic power while maintaining their purpose and their souls. The ritual to become a demon hunter was not for the faint of heart. Each candidate had to consume the heart of a demon, binding its essence to their own soul. The demon would rage within them for the rest of their existence, constantly seeking to take control, to corrupt, to destroy. Only those with the strongest wills could maintain their sanity, keeping the demon in check while channeling its power for their own purposes. The sacrifice of their eyes was equally significant. Physical sight was replaced with spectral vision, the ability to see through illusions and perceive the demonic essence within any creature. This sight revealed truth that normal eyes could never perceive, but it came at the cost of ever seeing the world in its natural beauty again. Colors faded, replaced by auras and energies. Faces became masks of spiritual essence. The demon hunters lived in a world transformed by their sacrifice. Beyond these transformations, the Illidari trained relentlessly in combat techniques designed specifically for fighting demons. They learned to channel fell energy through their bodies, to metamorphose temporarily into demonic forms of terrible power, to strike with speed and precision that matched even the fastest of hellspawn. Their warglaives, curved blades designed by Illidan himself, could cut through demonic flesh as easily as mortal steel through cloth. The demon hunters understood that they would be reviled by those they sought to protect. Their methods were too extreme, their appearance too disturbing, their powers too reminiscent of the enemy. They accepted this isolation as another sacrifice, another price paid in the endless war against the Legion. 10 years before the current invasion, Illidan had sent them on a mission to the demon world of Martyrdom. Their goal was to recover the Sargerite Keystone, an artifact that allowed travel between Legion-controlled worlds. The demon hunters had succeeded, fighting through hordes of demons and defeating the jailer Brood Queen Tirana. They had claimed the keystone and prepared to return to their master. But when they arrived at the Black Temple, they found only defeat. Illidan had fallen to the forces of Azeroth. Maiev and her wardens had captured the surviving Illidari, imprisoning them in the vault of the Wardens alongside their master. For 10 years they had languished in cells, their cause seemingly lost, their sacrifices apparently meaningless. Now they were free, released by the very Wardens who had imprisoned them. The irony was not lost on the demon hunters, but they had no time to appreciate it. Demons were everywhere, slaughtering everything in their path. The vault was falling. The Illidari fought their way through the chaos, their fell-enhanced abilities, making them more than a match for the Legion's foot soldiers. They sought to escape, to regroup, to understand what was happening and how they could continue their war against the demons. Along the way, they discovered a terrible truth. Illidan's body was gone. Gul'dan had claimed it, spiriting it away to the tomb of Sargeras for purposes that the demon hunters could only imagine with dread. Their master, the one being who had understood them, who had created them, who had given them purpose, was now in the hands of the enemy. The surviving demon hunters escaped the vault and made their way to the surface. There they found a world preparing for war. The Legion's invasion had begun, and Azeroth was scrambling to respond. The demon hunters faced a difficult choice. They could retreat into the shadows, continue their private war against the Legion as they had always done, or they could offer their services to the factions of Azeroth, becoming part of a larger effort, despite knowing how they would be received. They chose to fight alongside Azeroth. The Illidari reached out to both Alliance and Horde, offering their unique abilities in the war against the Legion. Their reception was mixed at best. Many viewed them with suspicion, seeing only the demonic power they wielded rather than the purpose behind it. But the leaders of both factions recognized that they could not afford to turn away willing allies, not when the fate of the world hung in the balance. The demon hunters established their headquarters on the Fell Hammer, a Legion vessel they had captured during their mission to Mardum. From there, they coordinated with the other defenders of Azeroth while maintaining their independence. They would fight the Legion their way, using methods that others might find distasteful, but that proved devastatingly effective against demonic forces. Their leader, the player character who had been Illidan's most trusted lieutenant, took on the mantle of command. They would guide the Illidari through the war to come, making the difficult decisions that their master was no longer present to make. It was a heavy burden, but the demon hunters had long ago learned to carry heavy burdens. News of the tomb of Sargeras and the demonic portal spreading from it reached the leaders of both Alliance and Horde within days. This was not a minor incursion, not a scouting force or a probe. This was a full-scale invasion, the largest the Legion had ever attempted. Demons poured through the portal in endless waves, establishing footholds across the broken isles and preparing to spread their corruption to the rest of Azeroth. The Alliance and Horde had been at each other's throats for years, their ancient enmity reignited by the war in Pandaria and the campaign in Draenor. But this threat was too great for either faction to face alone. In a remarkable display of unity, King Varian of the Alliance and Warchief Vol'jin of the Horde agreed to a joint assault on the broken shore. They would strike at the Legion's beachhead, destroy the portal, and end the invasion before it could truly begin. The combined fleet was the largest military force Azeroth had assembled since the Third War. Ships of the Alliance Navy sailed alongside Orcish juggernauts. Human soldiers stood ready beside Tauren warriors. Night elves and blood elves, dwarves and trolls, all prepared to fight together against an enemy that threatened them all. King Varian Rin stood at the prow of his flagship, the great sword Charlemagne in his hand. He had been a warrior all his life, had fought in more battles than he could count. He had lost his father to the orcs, had been enslaved and forced to fight as a gladiator, had clawed his way back to reclaim his throne. He was not afraid of death. He was only afraid of failing his people. Varian's life had been one of constant struggle. As a young prince, he had watched Stormwind burn during the First War, had fled with his people across the sea to Lordaeron. He had returned to rebuild his kingdom, only to see it threatened time and again by wars and catastrophes. The loss of his wife Tiffin to a riot had hardened him, transformed him from an idealistic ruler into a pragmatic warrior king. His time as a gladiator, enslaved by the Defias Brotherhood and stripped of his memories, had forged him into something even harder. He had fought his way to freedom, recovered his identity, and reclaimed his throne through strength of arms. The experience had taught him that sometimes diplomacy was not enough, that some conflicts could only be resolved through the edge of a blade. Charlemagne itself was a symbol of his dual nature. The blade had once been two swords, Shalator and Elamain, weapons wielded by the half-elven Varian when his soul had been split in two. When he was made whole again, the swords had merged into one, just as his two halves had merged into a single being of both, cunning and fury. The blade represented everything Varian had become, a union of opposites, a warrior diplomat, a king who could both negotiate and fight. Now he stood at the head of the greatest military force the Alliance had assembled since the Third War, prepared to face an enemy that made all previous threats seem minor in comparison. The demons did not negotiate, did not surrender, did not tire. They existed only to destroy, and they would keep coming until they were stopped. Warchief Vol'jin commanded the Horde forces from his own vessel. The troll shadow hunter had risen from the depths of the Darkspear tribe to become one of Azeroth's most respected leaders. He had opposed Garrosh Hellscream's tyranny, had led the rebellion that freed the Horde from corruption. He believed in honor, in strength, in the Horde's potential for greatness. He would not let that potential be destroyed by demons. Vol'jin's path to power had been unlikely. The Darkspear trolls were a small tribe, driven from their island home by Murlocs and the sea witch Sargeras. Thrall had saved them during the founding of the new Horde, had given them a place in Durotar where they could rebuild. Vol'jin had never forgotten that debt, had served the Horde loyally through every crisis that followed. His connection to the spirits gave him insight that other leaders lacked. The Loa whispered to him, ancient troll gods who had watched over his people since before the Sundering. They showed him visions of possible futures, guided his decisions in times of crisis, and gave him power that made him formidable even among the Horde's greatest champions. But the spirits had been silent about what awaited him on the broken shore. Perhaps they did not know. Perhaps they chose not to tell him. Or perhaps they understood that some destinies could not be avoided, and that Vol'jin's death would serve a purpose beyond his understanding. The fleet approached the broken shore under cover of night, hoping to catch the Legion forces by surprise. They landed on the beaches and immediately began the assault, driving inland toward the massive portal that dominated the center of the island. For a time, it seemed like they might succeed. The combined might of Alliance and Horde pushed the demons back, securing beachheads and establishing forward positions. The soldiers fought with desperate determination, knowing that the fate of their world hung in the balance. But it was a trap. Gul'dan had known they were coming. The Legion's spies had tracked the fleet from the moment it departed, had reported its composition and likely landing points. The Warlock had prepared a welcome worthy of Azeroth's greatest heroes. As the Alliance and Horde forces pushed deeper into the broken shore, they found themselves surrounded. Demons that had been hiding emerged from concealment. Portals opened across the battlefield, disgorging fresh waves of enemies. The invaders became the invaded, caught in a crossfire of fell magic and demonic blades. The battle became a desperate fight for survival. The carefully coordinated assault fell apart as units were separated and overwhelmed. Communication between Alliance and Horde broke down as both factions struggled simply to stay alive. King Varian fought at the head of his troops, Charlemagne blazing with light as it cut through demon after demon. He rallied the soldiers around him, forming a defensive perimeter that held against wave after wave of attackers. But for every demon that fell, two more seemed to take its place. The Horde forces fared no better. Vol'jin led charge after charge into the demon ranks, his mystical abilities wreaking havoc among the Legion's forces. But even his power had limits, and the demons seemed to have none. The Horde line began to buckle, pushed back by sheer numbers despite the warriors' fierce resistance. And then the fell Reavers arrived. These massive constructs had been the terror of Outland during the Burning Crusade. Now, improved versions stalked the broken shore, their weapons capable of devastating entire squads with a single blast. The appearance of these war machines broke whatever momentum the defenders had maintained. Sylvanas Windrunner, leading the Horde's ranged forces from a cliff overlooking the battle, saw the situation deteriorating rapidly. Vol'jin had been badly wounded, stabbed by a demon's poisoned blade. The Warchief was being carried to safety, but the Horde forces were in danger of complete collapse. Sylvanas made a decision. She ordered the retreat. The Horde forces pulled back, abandoning their positions and making for the ships. To the Alliance soldiers fighting below, it looked like abandonment. It looked like betrayal. They saw the Horde flags withdrawing and believed that Vol'jin had left them to die. Varian saw his options narrowing. The Alliance forces were surrounded, cut off from their ships by the Horde's withdrawal. He could attempt a fighting retreat, but that would cost countless lives and might not succeed. Or he could buy time for his soldiers to escape, even if it cost him his own life. For Varian, there was no choice at all. He ordered the retreat, commanding his forces to fall back to the ships by any means necessary. Then he turned to face the demon horde alone. Behind him, the gunship Skyfire waited to provide cover fire and evacuation. Varian fought like a man possessed, Charlemagne singing through the air as it claimed demon after demon. He was surrounded, outnumbered, doomed, and he did not care. Every moment he held was another moment for his soldiers to escape. The demons swarmed him, dragging him down through sheer weight of numbers. But Varian did not fall easily. Even overwhelmed, even wounded, he continued to fight. His last act was to hurl Charlemagne toward the skyfire, ensuring that the blade would not be claimed by the Legion. Gul'dan approached the fallen king, fell energy crackling around his hands. He looked down at the human who had caused his masters so much trouble and smiled. The warlock's fell magic tore Varian Rin apart. The survivors fled back to their capitals, bringing news of the disaster. The Broken Shore campaign had been a catastrophic failure. The Legion's portal remained open, demons continued to pour through, and Azeroth had lost two of its greatest leaders in a single day. Varian Rin was dead, disintegrated by Gul'dan's fell magic, until nothing remained but scattered dust. The news devastated the Alliance. Varian had been more than a king. He had been a symbol of human resilience, of the ability to endure any hardship and emerge stronger. His death left a void that seemed impossible to fill. His son Anduin inherited a kingdom in crisis. The young priest had never wanted to be a warrior, had always preferred diplomacy and faith to the sword. Now he was king, thrust into leadership at the worst possible moment. The Alliance needed strength, and Anduin was not sure he could provide it. Anduin Rin was everything his father had not been at his age. Where Varian had been headstrong and aggressive, Anduin was thoughtful and diplomatic. Where Varian had trained in the arts of war, Anduin had devoted himself to the light, becoming a priest of considerable power despite his youth. He had hoped to forge a lasting peace between Alliance and Horde, had believed that the factions could set aside their differences through understanding and compassion. The death of his father shattered those ideals. Anduin had watched the magical projection of Varian's final moments, had seen Gul'dan's fell magic tear the king apart. The violence of it, the cruelty, had awakened something in the young priest that he had never expected to feel. He understood now why his father had always insisted that strength must accompany wisdom, that sometimes the only answer to aggression was force. The burden of leadership fell upon Anduin's shoulders like a physical weight. He had to be strong for his people, had to project confidence even when doubt gnawed at his heart. The Alliance looked to him for guidance, for hope, for the assurance that they could survive this crisis. He could not afford to show weakness, no matter how much he grieved. In the days following the Broken Shore, Anduin stood vigil at the memorial for his father. There was no body to bury, nothing but Charlemagne, which had been recovered from the battlefield. The sword seemed too heavy for him to lift, a reminder of everything his father had been that he was not. But as he knelt in prayer, asking the light for guidance, Anduin began to understand that strength came in many forms. His path would not be his father's path. He would find his own way to lead, his own way to fight for those under his protection. Vol'jin lingered for hours after the retreat, the demon poison spreading through his body, despite every healing spell the Horde's priests could muster. The Warchief knew he was dying. He had seen it in the spirit's eyes when they spoke to him, had felt it in the creeping cold that no magic could dispel. The troll had lived a life of struggle and triumph. He had led the dark spear through countless hardships, had stood against Garrosh when the former Warchief had tried to purge the Horde of all non-orcs. He had believed that the Horde could be more than just a war machine, that it could be a family of outcasts who found strength in each other. Now that dream seemed distant, as the poison claimed him inch by inch. Vol'jin thought of his father, Sen'jin, who had died defending their people. He thought of Thrall, who had given the trolls a home when they had nothing. He thought of all the warriors who had followed him into battle, trusting him to lead them to victory. He had failed them at the broken shore, but perhaps he could still serve them with his final breaths. In his final moments, Vol'jin summoned Sylvanas Windrunner to his side. The Banshee Queen had led the retreat that saved the Horde's army, had proven herself a capable commander in the chaos of the broken shore, but she was surprised by what Vol'jin had to say. "The spirits have granted me clarity," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see now what must be done. You must be Warchief." Sylvanas was stunned. She had never sought such power, had always been content to rule her Forsaken from the shadows. But Vol'jin was insistent. The spirits had shown him, and he would not be denied. With his dying breath, he named Sylvanas Windrunner as the new Warchief of the Horde. The transition of power was not smooth. Many in the Horde questioned why Vol'jin would choose Sylvanas, a being of undeath who had often pursued her own agenda at the expense of the Horde's unity. But Vol'jin's word was law, and his dying wish would be honored. Azeroth had lost both its leaders. Now new leaders would have to rise to meet the challenge. Khadgar, the Archmage who had led the campaign against the Iron Horde and Gul'dan in Draenor, recognized that the situation required desperate measures. The Legion could not be defeated by conventional means. Their numbers were essentially infinite, drawn from countless conquered worlds across the cosmos. Azeroth needed something that could close the portal permanently. His research led him to the Pillars of Creation, Titan artifacts that had been used to shape Azeroth in the earliest days of its existence. These pillars had been employed during the War of the Ancients, when the Highborn of Suramar used them to seal a similar demonic gateway. If they could be gathered once more, they might be capable of closing the portal at the tomb of Sargeras. There were 5 pillars of creation scattered across the broken isles. Each pillar had been crafted by one of the Titans during the ordering of Azeroth, imbued with the essence of its creator and capable of reshaping reality itself. Together, they represented the combined power of the Pantheon, the godlike beings who had shaped countless worlds across the universe. The Hammer of Khazgoroth lay in High Mountain, protected by the Tauren tribes who had guarded it for millennia. This artifact of the Shaper Titan could manipulate earth and stone on a massive scale, raising mountains or flattening them with equal ease. It had been used during the War of the Ancients to help contain the first demonic invasion, and the Tauren had sworn to protect it ever since. The Tidestone of Golganath was hidden in Asuna, its location known only to the Ghost Elves who had once served Prince Verandus. The Highfather Titan had used this artifact to control the seas and storms, and its power over water had been instrumental in reshaping Azeroth's coastlines. In the wrong hands, it could unleash tsunamis that would devastate entire continents. The Tears of Elune rested in Val'shara, guarded by druids who tended the ancient groves. Despite its name, suggesting a connection to the moon goddess, this pillar had been shaped by the Titans and later associated with Elune by the night elves who came to venerate her. It held power over life and death, growth and decay, the endless cycle that governed all living things. The Aegis of Agrimar had been taken to Stormheim by the Vrikul, who incorporated it into their trials of worthiness. The former champion of the Pantheon had created this defensive artifact to protect against corruption and assault. Warriors who proved themselves worthy in the eyes of the Vrikul gods could claim the Aegis, its protective power shielding them from harm. The fifth pillar, the Eye of Aman'Thul, was in the hands of the enemy. Gul'dan had claimed it from the tomb of Sargeras and used it to power the Nightwell in Suramar, where the Nightborn had allied themselves with the Legion. Khadgar made a decision that would have been unthinkable in normal times. He relocated the entire city of Dalaran from its position above Crystalsong Forest in Northrend to the skies above the Broken Isles. The floating city of mages would serve as a base of operations for the campaign to come, a neutral ground where Alliance and Horde could coordinate their efforts against the Legion. The relocation of Dalaran was a feat of magical engineering that had been attempted only once before, when the city had been moved from the eastern kingdoms to Northrend during the war against the Lich King. The process required the combined efforts of the Kirin Tor's finest mages, channeling enormous amounts of arcane energy through the city's ancient wards to lift it from one location and deposit it in another. The dangers were considerable. A miscalculation could collapse the teleportation field, scattering the city across the void between spaces. The wards that protected Dalaran from attack were temporarily weakened during the transit, leaving it vulnerable to Legion interference. And the energy expenditure was so great that many of the mages involved would be exhausted for days afterward, unable to contribute to the war effort when they were needed most. But Khadgar was nothing if not bold. He had faced impossible odds before, had stood against Gul'dan on Draenor, and emerged victorious. The risk of moving Dalaran was real, but the benefits outweighed the dangers. From its new position above the Broken Isles, the city could serve as a staging ground for operations across the entire region, its teleportation network allowing rapid deployment of forces to wherever they were needed. The Council of Six, ruling body of the Kirin Tor, supported Khadgar's plan. They understood that the Legion's invasion threatened not just political boundaries, but the existence of all life on Azeroth. Petty factional disputes had to be set aside in the face of existential threat. Adventurers from across Azeroth answered the call to arms. They traveled to Dalaran, now floating above the Broken Isles, and received their missions. Each would be sent to one of the 4 zones where a pillar of creation waited. Each would face unique challenges and threats. Each would play a crucial role in saving the world. The organization of Azeroth's defense was remarkable in its complexity. The various class orders that had formed during the war each established their own headquarters and chains of command. Death Knights gathered at Acheris, the floating necropolis that had served their order since the war against the Lich King. Paladins rallied at Light's Hope Chapel, the sacred ground where the Silver Hand had been reborn. Druids withdrew to the Dream Grove in Val'shara, communing with the nature spirits who would guide them in the battles to come. Each order wielded artifact weapons of incredible power, relics that had shaped the history of Azeroth and would now be put to use against the Legion. The Ashbringer, which had been forged to destroy the undead, now blazed against demonic flesh. The Doomhammer, which had been wielded by Thrall himself, channeled the elements against the Legion's war machines. The Scythe of Elune, which held power over the moon goddess's mysteries, cut through demons as easily as it had harvested grain. These weapons were more than simple tools. They were intelligent artifacts, imbued with the memories and sometimes the souls of those who had wielded them before. Champions who carried them felt the weight of history in their hands, the expectations of generations of heroes who had fought and died for Azeroth. The weapons demanded excellence from their wielders, and in return, they provided power that could challenge even the mightiest demons. The coordination between the class orders was crucial to the war effort. Each order had its own strengths, its own specialties, its own methods of gathering intelligence and striking at the enemy. Working together, they formed a network of capable warriors that could respond to threats anywhere on the Broken Isles within hours. This coordination was what allowed Azeroth to maintain pressure on the Legion across multiple fronts, never letting the demons concentrate their forces for a decisive blow. The journey to recover the Pillars of Creation took the champions of Azeroth across the full breadth of the Broken Isles. Each zone presented its own challenges, its own stories, its own lessons about the history of this ancient land. Azsuna had once been a prosperous kingdom of the Kaldorei, ruled by Prince Ferondis from his palace overlooking the sea. During the War of the Ancients, Ferondis had attempted to destroy the Highborn's portal to the Twisting Nether, hoping to end the demonic invasion. But his plan was betrayed by one of his own court. Queen Azshara learned of his treachery and cursed him and his people, transforming them into ghosts bound forever to the land they had sought to save. For 10,000 years, Ferondis and his people had existed as spectral echoes, unable to truly live or die. The prince's guilt over his failure weighed heavily upon him, even after so many centuries. He had tried to do the right thing, and his reward had been eternal torment. The champions found the Tidestone of Gul'dan, hidden beneath the waves of Azsuna, guarded by the Naga forces of Queen Azshara herself. The Naga Queen had sent her servants to claim the artifact, hoping to use it for her own mysterious purposes. The champions fought through the Naga forces and retrieved the Tidestone, earning the gratitude of Prince Ferondis, who finally saw hope that his long curse might one day be lifted. The story of Azsuna was also tied to the blue dragonflight. Senegos, an ancient blue dragon, had made his home here, and his brood had been corrupted by the nightmare. The champions that helped Senegos and his consort Stelagosa deal with this threat, discovering in the process that the blue dragons might not be as diminished as the world believed. The Academy of Narthalas, once a center of arcane learning, now lay in ruins, its halls haunted by the ghosts of students and teachers who had died in the Sundering. The champions explored these ruins, uncovering the history of a civilization that had been destroyed by the very demons they now fought. The Academy had been a prestigious institution, a place where the brightest minds of the Kaldorei Empire had gathered to study the arcane arts. Its libraries had contained knowledge accumulated over thousands of years, tomes of power that had been lost in the Sundering. The ghosts that haunted the ruins still went through the motions of their former lives, attending lectures that had ended 10 millennia ago, taking examinations that would never be graded, pursuing degrees that no longer meant anything. The tragedy of Narthalas was personal for many night elves who visited. This had been what their civilization was, culture of learning and magic that had reached heights few mortal societies had achieved. The Sundering had destroyed all of it, had killed millions, had reshaped the very face of the world. The ruins were a reminder of what had been lost and what the Legion had taken from them. The champions also encountered the blue dragons in Asuna, discovering that the dragonflight's numbers had dwindled but not disappeared entirely. Senegos, an ancient worm of immense age, had made his home in the region, and his descendant Stelagosa worked alongside the champions to protect what remained of the Blue Flight's legacy. The dragons offered wisdom and occasional aid, reminders that even diminished powers could still contribute to the war effort. Val'shara presented threats of a different nature. This ancient forest was the birthplace of Druidism, the plode where Cenarius had first taught the Night Elves to walk the paths of nature magic. The World Tree. Shaladrassel stood at its heart, a massive arbor that connected the physical world to the Emerald Dream, the blueprint realm where nature spirits dwelled. The great druidic groves of this region had been corrupted by the Emerald Nightmare, a cancer within the dream that had been festering for years. The nightmare was not simply a disease of plants and animals. It was a corruption of the very essence of nature, a twisting of the dream into something dark and malevolent. Where the dream should have shown idealized visions of nature at its most beautiful, the nightmare revealed nature at its most terrible: decay, predation, suffering, and death without the hope of renewal. The satyr Lord Xavius, ancient enemy of the Night Elves, had allied himself with forces of the old gods to spread the nightmare's corruption across the physical world. Xavius had a history with the Night Elves that stretched back 10,000 years. He had been Queen Ashura's chief counselor during the War of the Ancients, had been the one who first contacted Sargeras and invited the Legion to Azeroth. When Malfurion Stormrage defeated Xavius during that ancient war, the Demon Lord was not destroyed. He was transformed into a satyr, a creature of chaos and corruption, and he had spent the millennia since plotting his revenge. The nightmare had become his weapon, a tool to corrupt everything the Druids held sacred and destroy the natural world they had sworn to protect. Shaladrassel's corruption was the most visible sign of the nightmare's spread. The World Tree's roots reached deep into the earth and the dream simultaneously, and when those roots became corrupted, the disease spread in both directions. The groves around the tree began to wither and twist, their inhabitants transformed into nightmare creatures that attacked anything that moved. The Druids of Val'shara fought desperately to contain the corruption, but they were losing ground. Malfurion Stormrage himself had entered the nightmare to confront the threat at its source, but he had been captured by Xavius, his power used to fuel the corruption he had sought to destroy. The champions fought through the corrupted groves, cleansing what they could and destroying what they could not save. They recovered the Tears of Elune from the Temple of Elune, but the cost was terrible. The green dragon aspect Ysera, corrupted by the nightmare, had to be put down by the very champions she had once aided. Her death sent shockwaves through the dragonflights, another in a long series of losses that the dragons had suffered since the cataclysm. The death of Ysera was mourned across Azeroth. She had been the Dreamer, the guardian of the Emerald Dream, one of the dragon aspects empowered by the Titans to protect the world. Her corruption and death represented the depths of the Legion's threat, their ability to touch even the most sacred and protected beings. Ysera had been ancient when the Night Elves were young, had watched over the Dream, since before mortal memory began. She had been given her charge by the Titans themselves, tasked with maintaining the blueprint of Azeroth against the day when it might be needed to restore the world after catastrophe. Her green dragonflight had served as guardians of nature, protectors of the wild places, servants of the Dream. The nightmare had been Ysera's greatest failure. She had sensed its presence early, had tried to contain it within the Dream, had believed that she could keep it from spreading. But the corruption was too deep, fed by sources she had not understood. The old gods had whispered through the cracks in reality, had found willing servants among those who craved power, had slowly turned her guardians into agents of chaos. When the nightmare finally claimed Ysera herself, it was the culmination of millennia of corruption. She had fought against it to the last, her mind struggling against the darkness that clouded her thoughts. But in the end, even her ancient will was not enough. She emerged from the nightmare as a creature of destruction, her once gentle nature twisted into something monstrous. The champions who faced her did so with heavy hearts. Many of them had worked alongside Ysera in previous conflicts, had relied on her wisdom and her power. To strike her down was to acknowledge that the nightmare could corrupt anyone, that no being was truly safe from its influence. It was a sobering reminder of what they were fighting against. When Ysera fell, her spirit was claimed by Elune. The goddess of the moon transformed the fallen aspect into a constellation, preserving her essence among the stars. It was a small comfort to those who had loved Ysera, but it proved that even in death, the guardians of Azeroth were not forgotten. The Temple of Elune, where the Tear of Elune had been kept, was cleansed of corruption. The druids who had survived the nightmare's assault began the long process of healing Val'shara, restoring what the corruption had damaged. It would take years, perhaps centuries, for the region to fully recover. But the immediate threat had been contained. High Mountain was the domain of the Tauren, descendants of those who had fought alongside the Night Elves in the War of the Ancients. These were not the Tauren of Kalimdor, though they shared common ancestry. The High Mountain Tauren had developed their own culture over 10,000 years of isolation, their traditions shaped by the mountain environment and the sacred duty they had inherited. The tribes of High Mountain had guarded the hammer of Khazgoroth since that ancient conflict, keeping it safe from those who would misuse its power. The responsibility had become central to their identity, a purpose that gave meaning to their existence, even in times of peace. Each generation was taught the importance of the hammer, the stories of what it could do and what would happen if it fell into the wrong hands. The mountain itself was sacred to the Tauren, a connection to the earth that sustained them and the spirits that guided their shamans. Every peak and valley had significance. Every cave and stream was associated with legends and rituals that stretched back beyond memory. To live in High Mountain was to be part of something larger than oneself, to participate in a tradition that had endured for millennia. The four tribes each had their own character. The High Mountain tribe were the leaders, the chieftains who coordinated the others and maintained the alliance that had kept the Tauren strong. The Skyhorn were masters of the air, riding great eagles and maintaining watch over the mountain's approaches. The Rivermain were fishers and farmers, providing food and supplies for the others. And the Blood Totem were the warriors, fierce and proud, always ready to defend their home against any threat. But the Tauren were not the only inhabitants of High Mountain. The Drogbar, creatures of living stone, had long resented the Tauren's dominance. Their leader, Dargrul the Underking, had risen to unite the Drogbar clans and challenge Tauren supremacy. When he learned of the Hammer of Khaz'goroth, he saw an opportunity to claim power beyond anything the Drogbar had ever possessed. Dargrul stole the hammer, using its titan power to reshape the very earth beneath High Mountain. The Tauren tribes were thrown into chaos, their unity shattered by the sudden loss of the artifact they had protected for so long. The champions had to help reunite the tribes, gathering the scattered High Mountain, Blood Totem, Skyhorn, and Rivermain Tauren into a coalition capable of challenging Dargrul. The campaign against the Underking was long and brutal. Dargrul's control of the hammer gave him tremendous power, allowing him to summon earthquakes and animate stone golems. The very mountains shook when he wielded the artifact, rocks splitting and fissures opening beneath the feet of his enemies. He had raised an army of Drogbar fanatics, creatures who saw him as a god made manifest, whose devotion knew no limits. The champions pursued him through the caverns beneath High Mountain, vast underground networks that the Drogbar had called home for millennia. These were not simple caves, but elaborate tunnel systems, carved over countless generations and decorated with the crude art of a civilization that few surface dwellers had ever seen. The Drogbar were not merely monsters. They were a people with their own culture, their own history, their own grievances against the Tauren who had dominated the surface for so long. Dargrul had tapped into those grievances, unifying the normally fractious Drogbar clans through a combination of charisma and raw power. He promised them a world where the Drogbar would no longer hide in darkness, where they would rule the mountains that had always been their rightful home. The Hammer of Khaz'goroth made that promise seem achievable. The final confrontation took place in Dargrul's throne room, a massive cavern lit by rivers of magma and decorated with trophies from his conquests. The Underking wielded the hammer with devastating effect, each blow capable of shattering stone and bone alike. The champions had to coordinate perfectly, exploiting brief moments of vulnerability between his massive attacks. When Dargrul finally fell, his dream of Drogbar supremacy died with him. The Hammer of Khaz'goroth was recovered, though the Tauren had paid dearly for its protection. The caverns beneath High Mountain would take years to fully explore and secure, and the surviving Drogbar retreated deeper underground, nursing their wounds and their hatred. The reunification of the High Mountain tribes was not simple. The Blood Totem had been corrupted by the Legion, their chieftain Torok Blood Totem having made a pact with demons in exchange for power. The champions had to destroy the Blood Totem's leadership and purge their fell corruption before the remaining members could be welcomed back into the United Tribes. Huln High Mountain, the legendary Tauren hero who had fought in the War of the Ancients, had left behind a legacy that still shaped his people 10,000 years later. The champions discovered echoes of his story throughout the region, learning how he had used the hammer of Khazgoroth to defeat the demons of his age. His example inspired the modern High Mountain to find the courage to face their own demonic threat. With Dargrul defeated and the tribes reunited, the High Mountain Tauren began to look beyond their mountain home. They would eventually join the Horde, bringing their unique perspective and strength to the faction. But that alliance lay in the future. For now, they were content to have survived and to have protected the artifact their ancestors had guarded for so long. Stormheim posed perhaps the greatest political challenges of any zone. The Vrykul of this region were ancient cousins of humanity, giants who had been shaped by the Titans in ages past. They had split from the curse of flesh that transformed many of them into the human race, remaining in their original titanic forms and developing a culture centered on martial prowess and honorable death. The Vrykul worshipped the god Odin, who had created the Valkyr and established the Halls of Valor as a repository for the souls of worthy warriors. Odin was not a true god in the cosmic sense, but a keeper, one of the Titan-forged beings who had been given dominion over aspects of Azeroth's defense. His power was immense by mortal standards, and to the Vrykul who served him, the distinction between keeper and god was academic. The Halls of Valor were a paradise for warriors, a realm where those who died in glorious battle could feast and fight for eternity. The Valkyr, winged beings of tremendous power, served as Odin's messengers and the guides who collected worthy souls from battlefields across the world. To be chosen by a Valkyr was the highest honor a Vrykul warrior could achieve, a guarantee of eternal reward for a life spent in service to combat. The Vrykul had their own opinions about the Legion invasion. Some saw it as an opportunity, a chance to prove their valor against worthy foes and earn their place in the Halls of Valor. Others saw it as a threat to their way of life, an army that destroyed without honor and offered nothing but corruption and death. The division led to conflict within Vrykul society, with some clans aligning themselves with the Legion while others fought to resist. But Odin was not the only power in Stormheim. Helya, once Odin's greatest servant, had been cursed by him when she refused to continue harvesting the souls of the dead. She had become a goddess of the underworld, ruling the realm of Helheim and commanding an army of Kvaldir sea raiders. Her hatred for Odin had festered for millennia, and she saw the Legion invasion as an opportunity to finally destroy her former master. The Aegis of Agramar was the prize of the Vrykul's trials of worthiness. Warriors competed for the honor of claiming it, proving their valor through combat and challenge. God King Skovald, a Vrykul warlord who had allied himself with the Legion, sought to claim the Aegis and deliver it to his demonic masters. The champions competed in the trials alongside Skovald, ultimately defeating him and claiming the Aegis. But their involvement in Stormheim had drawn them into conflicts beyond the simple recovery of artifacts. They had witnessed Sylvanas Windrunner's secret mission to Helheim, where she sought to enslave more Valkyr to replenish her ability to raise new Forsaken. This mission had been interrupted by Gen Greymane, whose personal vendetta against Sylvanas for the death of his son had led him to pursue her across Stormheim. The conflict between Sylvanas and Gen represented the simmering tensions between Alliance and Horde that even the Legion invasion could not entirely suppress. Both factions had their own agendas, their own grievances, their own plans that extended beyond the immediate crisis. The unity that had been forged at the Broken Shore was already beginning to crack. Gen Greymane's vendetta was deeply personal. His son Liam had died during the Forsaken assault on Gilneas, killed by an arrow meant for Gen himself. The king had watched his heir fall, had cradled his body as the last breath left it, had sworn vengeance against the woman who had ordered the attack. When he saw Sylvanas in Stormheim, pursuing her own mysterious agenda, while Azeroth burned, all his rage had come flooding back. The confrontation between them was brief but violent. Gen's Worgen form gave him physical advantages that few could match, and his fury lent him strength beyond even that. He shattered Sylvanas' lantern, the artifact she had sought to use in her bargain with Helya, and drove her from the field. It was not the final reckoning he sought, but it was enough to prevent whatever dark scheme she had been pursuing. Sylvanas retreated, her plans foiled but her ambitions undiminished. She would remember this defeat, would add it to the ledger of grievances she maintained against those who opposed her. The Banshee Queen played a long game, and setbacks were merely obstacles to be overcome in time. The story of Stormheim also revealed the complex relationship between Odin and Helya. Once, Helya had been Odin's greatest creation, the first of the Valkyr. But when Odin sought to use her to harvest the souls of mortal warriors for his halls of valor, she had refused. In his anger, Odin had cursed her, transforming her into a monstrous goddess of the deep. Helya's hatred for Odin had grown over millennia, festering into an obsession that consumed her entire existence. She had created the Kvaldir, undead sea raiders who served her will. She had built Helheim as a mockery of the halls of valor, a realm where the souls of the unworthy were tormented for eternity. The champions entered the halls of valor itself, facing the trials that Odin had designed to test the worthiest of warriors. They proved themselves to the keeper of the Aegis, earning the right to claim it. But they also saw the complexity of Odin's character, his pride and his power, his willingness to reshape even those who served him to fit his vision. These were not simple conflicts of good versus evil. The gods of Stormheim had their own motivations, their own histories, their own grievances that stretched back to the dawn of time. The champions navigated these ancient feuds as best they could, claiming the pillar of creation while trying not to become too entangled in wars that predated mortal memory. While the champions recovered the pillars of creation, events were unfolding in Suramar that would reshape the political landscape of the Broken Isles. The ancient city of the Nightborn had been hidden beneath a magical shield for 10,000 years, its inhabitants evolving into a unique subspecies of elf dependent on the power of the Nightwell. Grand Magistrix Elisande ruled Suramar with absolute authority. She had kept her people safe through the millennia, maintaining the shield that protected them from a world she believed had been destroyed by the Sundering. Her power was absolute, her word law, her will the only consideration that mattered in Nightborn society. She had ruled for so long that most Nightborn could not imagine life under any other leader. Elisande's mastery of chronomancy was legendary even among her own people. She could peer into possible futures, could see the branching paths that events might take depending on choices yet unmade. This ability had helped her guide Suramar through countless crises over the millennia, had allowed her to anticipate threats before they materialized and prepare responses before they were needed. When that shield finally lowered and the Nightborn discovered that the outside world still existed, Elisan used her powers to examine the possibilities that lay before her people. She saw futures where Suramar resisted the Legion and was destroyed, her citizens slaughtered or worse. She saw futures where Suramar fled and was hunted across the world, never finding safety. And she saw futures where Suramar cooperated, where her people survived as servants of a new order. The choice she made was the choice of a ruler who valued her people's survival above all other considerations. She would sacrifice their freedom to preserve their lives. It was a bargain she believed she could manage, a compromise that would buy time until circumstances changed. Gul'dan came to Suramar as an ambassador of the Legion. He offered Elisande a simple bargain: lower the shield, grant the Legion access to the Nightwell's power, and the Nightborn would be welcomed as allies in the new order that would follow the Legion's victory. Refuse, and Suramar would be destroyed. Elisande had seen the Legion's power. She had watched from her city as demons poured through the portal at the tomb of Sargeras. She calculated the odds and concluded that resistance was futile. Better to ally with the winning side and preserve her people than to fight and be annihilated. Not all Nightborn agreed with her decision. First Arcanist Thalisra had served Elisande for centuries, had been one of her most trusted advisors, but she could not accept submission to the Legion. She gathered a small group of like-minded rebels and attempted to prevent Elisande from lowering the shield. The attempt failed. Thalisra was betrayed by advisor Melandris, captured by Elisande's forces, and left for dead in the wilds of Suramar. The shield fell, and the Legion entered the city. Thalisra survived barely. She was found by the champions of Azeroth and brought to Shalaran, a hidden refuge beneath Suramar where the rebellion would be born. Cut off from the Nightwell, Thalisra and her followers faced a new threat. Without the magical energy that had sustained them for millennia, they would slowly wither into mindless creatures called withered. The champions helped the Nightfallen, as the rebels came to be called, survive their exile. They gathered ancient mana to sustain them, recruited allies from across the Broken Isles, and gradually built a resistance capable of challenging Elisande's regime. The Suramar campaign was different from the others. It was not about recovering an artifact or defeating a single enemy. It was about liberating a people, about showing them that there was an alternative to submission. The champions worked within Suramar's society, disguising themselves as loyal citizens, undermining the regime from within while the rebellion gathered strength. The city itself was a marvel of ancient elven architecture, preserved for 10,000 years beneath its protective shield. Spires of shimmering crystal reached toward a sky that had been artificial for millennia, lit by the eternal glow of the Nightwell. The streets were lined with gardens that had never known winter, tended by citizens who had never known hardship until the shield fell. The Nightborn had evolved during their long isolation. Their skin had taken on a pale purple hue, their eyes glowed with arcane energy, and their dependence on the Nightwell had become absolute. Without its magic, they would slowly waste away, their forms becoming the mindless, ravening creatures called the Withered. This dependence made them vulnerable to anyone who controlled the Nightwell, which was exactly how Elisande had maintained her grip on power for so long. The resistance that Thalyssra led was fighting not just against the Legion, but against the very nature of their society. They had to convince their people that life without the Nightwell was possible, that freedom was worth the risk of withering, that 10,000 years of isolation had not made them incapable of facing the outside world. The champions proved essential in this effort. They brought news of the wider world, of other elven civilizations that had survived and even thrived. The Night Elves of Kalimdor, who had given up their immortality but maintained their connection to nature. The Blood Elves of Quel'Thalas, who had overcome their own magical addiction. These examples showed the Nightborn that there was life beyond the Nightwell, that their dependence could be overcome. The recruitment of allies was a delicate political dance. Many Nightborn sympathized with the rebellion, but feared the consequences of open opposition. They provided information, supplies, and shelter in secret, never quite committing to the cause, but never quite abandoning it either. The champions had to identify these potential supporters, gain their trust, and convince them that the time for half measures was past. Eventually, the Nightfallen secured enough power to launch an open insurrection. With the aid of the Night Elves, the Blood Elves, and the Kirin Tor, they assaulted the Nighthold, Elisande's seat of power and the location of the Nightwell itself. The raids that followed each major zone told stories of their own. The Emerald Nightmare was an entire realm corrupted by the old god's influence, a twisted reflection of the natural world where nothing was as it seemed. The champions entered the nightmare to rescue Malfurion Stormrage and destroy the corruption at its source. Xavius waited at the heart of the nightmare, his power fed by centuries of hatred and the blessing of the old god N'Zoth. He had been many things in his long existence: a highborn counselor who betrayed his people to the Legion, a satyr transformed by his failure into a creature of corruption. Now he was something more, a conduit for the old god's will, determined to spread the nightmare across all of Azeroth. The Nightmare Lord had prepared his domain carefully over the millennia. Every shadow contained a trap. Every path led deeper into madness. The realm he ruled was a reflection of reality, twisted by fear and despair, where familiar landscapes became alien and hostile. Trees that should have offered shelter reached out with grasping branches. Pools of water that should have refreshed instead dragged victims into depths that had no bottom. The very air was toxic, filling the lungs with whispers that eroded sanity. Xavius himself had become something beyond mortal or even demonic. His form shifted constantly, adapting to whatever would most terrify his opponents. Sometimes he appeared as the highborn counselor he had once been, handsome and persuasive, offering bargains that seemed reasonable until the cost was revealed. Sometimes he was the satyr, bestial and savage, attacking with claws and fail magic. And sometimes he was something else entirely, a mass of tendrils and eyes that defied a description, a herald of the old, gods whose true masters lurked in the darkness beyond the nightmare. His connection to N'Zoth gave him access to power that even the Legion could not provide. The old god had been whispering from its prison beneath the waves since before the Night Elves existed, had been working toward freedom through agents both knowing and unknowing. Xavius was its most successful vessel, a being who had willingly embraced corruption and would spread it to the entire world if given the chance. The battle against Xavius was fought on multiple levels. The champions faced physical threats from corrupted creatures and traps designed to drive them mad. They also faced psychological assaults as the nightmare tried to turn them against each other, to make them see enemies where there were only allies. Only by maintaining their focus and their trust in each other could they reach Xavius and destroy him. Cenarius, the demigod who had been corrupted by the nightmare, was freed by the champions' actions. Malfurion was rescued. The nightmare was not destroyed, for such things cannot be truly eliminated, but its immediate threat was neutralized. The trial of valor took the champions to Helheim itself, the realm of the dead ruled by Helya. This was not a simple dungeon raid, but a journey into the heart of darkness, a descent into a realm that existed to punish and torment. The goddess of the underworld had made a bargain with Gul'dan, promising to keep Illidan's soul imprisoned in her domain in exchange for payment that the warlock would provide. Her alliance with the Legion made her a threat that could not be ignored. Helheim was everything the Halls of Valor were not. Where Odin's realm celebrated victory and glory, Helya's domain wallowed in defeat and despair. The souls trapped there were those deemed unworthy, warriors who had failed in combat or betrayed their oaths, or simply died in ways that Odin found dishonorable. They were condemned to eternal suffering, tormented by creatures that fed on fear and pain. The architecture of Helheim reflected its purpose. Ships of the dead sailed through seas of mist, carrying souls to various torments. Cliffs of jagged bone rose from shores of ash and shadow. The sky was not a sky at all, but a ceiling of storm clouds that constantly threatened but never delivered rain, an eternal promise of relief that was never fulfilled. The champions fought through Helheim's horrors, facing the souls of damned warriors and creatures twisted by Helya's dark magic. The Kavaldir were everywhere, the undead sea raiders who had served Helya since her transformation. These creatures had terrorized the coasts of the Broken Isles for millennia, dragging ships to watery graves and claiming their crews for their mistress. They ultimately confronted Helya herself, destroying her physical form and freeing the souls she had kept captive, including the soul of Illidan Stormrage. The Nighthold represented the culmination of the Suramar campaign. This massive palace complex contained both the Nightwell and the Eye of Aman'Thul, the fifth pillar of creation that Gul'dan had claimed. The champions would need to fight through Elisande's elite forces, confront the Grand Magistrix herself, and finally face Gul'dan at the pinnacle of power. The raid was a testament to how far the rebellion had come. Nightfallen forces fought alongside the champions, their knowledge of the Nighthold's layout proving invaluable. The Night Elves and Blood Elves set aside their ancient animosity to join the assault, recognizing that the Nightborn's liberation was worth the temporary discomfort of cooperation. Elisande was a formidable opponent, her mastery of time magic allowing her to manipulate the flow of combat in ways that defied conventional tactics. She could speed herself up, slow her enemies down, and even briefly reverse time to undo damage she had suffered. The champions found themselves fighting in bubbles of accelerated and decelerated time, their movements jerky and unpredictable as Elisanda's magic warped reality around them. The Grand Magistrix had studied chronomancy for millennia, drawing on the power of the Eye of Amanthul to fuel abilities that would have been impossible otherwise. She could see strands of possibility, the paths that time might take depending on choices yet unmade. She had foreseen the Legion's victory in countless potential futures, which was why she had chosen to ally with them. The alternatives she had seen were worse. But Elisanda had not foreseen this. She had not anticipated the tenacity of the rebellion, the power of the champions who opposed her, the possibility that Azeroth might actually win. Her visions had shown her futures where resistance was crushed, where those who opposed the Legion suffered fates worse than death. She had chosen collaboration to spare her people that suffering. The battle raged through the Nightholds, chambers, past arcane constructs, and Nightborn guards who fought to the death for their magistrix. The champions pressed forward through waves of chronomantic magic, each member of the assault force playing their role in the complex dance of combat. Healers cleansed temporal anomalies, while warriors pressed the attack, slowly wearing down Elisanda's seemingly infinite reserves of power. But even her considerable power was not enough to stop the combined might of the rebellion and its allies. In her final moments, Elisande saw a vision of the future. She saw the Legion defeated, saw her people freed from demonic domination, saw Thalesra leading the Nightborn into a new era. She had chosen wrong, had aligned with the losing side because she could not imagine that Azeroth might actually win. With her death, she acknowledged her error and passed leadership to one who had seen more clearly. Gul'dan waited at the very top of the Nighthold, atop a platform where he had been, working to complete the Legion's ultimate plan. The body of Illidan Stormrage lay on an altar before him, prepared for a ritual that would have consequences beyond anything the champions could imagine. Gul'dan intended to use Illidan's body as a vessel for Sargeras himself. The Dark Titan would enter Azeroth through the demon hunter's corrupted flesh, claiming a form that would allow him to walk the world and personally oversee its destruction. It was the ultimate culmination of everything Gul'dan had worked toward, everything the Legion had planned since the dawn of time. The battle against Gul'dan was the most challenging the champions had yet faced. The warlock had absorbed tremendous power from the Nightwell, his abilities enhanced far beyond what he had possessed on Draenor. He summoned demons, hurled fell magic, and called upon the power of the Dark Titan to crush those who opposed him. But the champions had power of their own. They wielded artifact weapons of legendary might, blades, and staves and bows that had shaped the history of Azeroth. They fought with the coordination and determination of warriors who had faced impossible odds before and emerged victorious. They pushed Gul'dan to the brink of defeat, and then Illidan rose. Khadgar had recovered Illidan's soul from Helheim, had found a way to reunite it with the body that Gul'dan had prepared. The demon hunter's eyes blazed with fell fire as he broke free from the altar, his consciousness restored after years of imprisonment. He looked upon Gul'dan, the warlock who had served his masters so faithfully, and saw only an obstacle to be removed. The confrontation was brief. Gul'dan threw everything he had at Illidan, but the demon hunter was beyond such attacks now. He had been forged in the fires of sacrifice, had given up everything to become a weapon against the Legion. Gul'dan was just another demon to be destroyed. Illidan tore the warlock apart with fell energy, the same way Gul'dan had killed Varian Rin at the Broken Shore. When it was done, nothing remained of Gul'dan but his skull, which Illidan crushed in his hand with grim satisfaction. The Eye of Amenthul was recovered. All 5 pillars of creation were now in the hands of Azeroth's defenders. The path to the tomb of Sargeras was open. But before the assault on the tomb could begin, there were matters that needed resolution. The most significant involved Illidan himself and the destiny that had been prepared for him. During the campaign across the Broken Isles, the champions had discovered an artifact called the Light's Heart. This object proved to be the core of a Naru, the beings of pure light that had guided the Draenei across the cosmos. Specifically, it was the core of Zera, the prime Naru, the most powerful of her kind. The Naru were ancient beings, older than most mortal civilizations, creatures of pure holy energy who had dedicated their existence to opposing the forces of darkness. They had guided the Draenei through their long exodus across the cosmos, had provided hope and purpose to a people who had lost everything. Their light was a beacon in the darkness, a promise that good could triumph over evil if only the faithful remained true. Zera was the eldest and most powerful of her kind. She had watched civilizations rise and fall across the cosmos, had witnessed the birth and death of stars, had guided countless souls toward the light over the eons of her existence. Her wisdom was beyond mortal comprehension, her power sufficient to challenge even the mightiest demons. When she spoke, the faithful listened, for her words carried the weight of ages. Zera had a prophecy concerning Illidan. She believed him to be the child of light and shadow, a being foretold to end the age of demons. She had guided events across millennia to ensure that Illidan would survive, would be resurrected, would fulfill the destiny she had foreseen for him. When the champions brought the Light's Heart to safety, Zera communicated with them through visions. She showed them glimpses of Illidan's past, of the sacrifices he had made, and the choices that had led him to become what he was. She spoke of his importance, of the role he was destined to play in the final battle against the Legion. After Illidan's resurrection, Zera manifested in full, her light-infused form appearing before the demon hunter to deliver her message personally. She offered him what she believed to be the greatest gift possible. She would fill him with the light, transform him into a being of holy power, purge the fell corruption from his soul. He would become what the prophecy demanded, the champion who would lead Azeroth to victory. Illidan refused. The demon hunter had made his choices with full knowledge of their consequences. He had sacrificed his eyes for demonic sight. He had bound demons to his soul for their power. He had been reviled by his own people, imprisoned by his own brother, killed by those he had sought to save. Every scar on his body, every shadow in his soul, represented a choice he had made in pursuit of his goal. He would not have those choices erased. He would not become what someone else wanted him to be. His destiny was his own to forge, not Zera's to dictate. When Zera attempted to force the transformation upon him, restraining him with chains of light and beginning the process without his consent, Illidan shattered those chains. He destroyed the prime Naru, reducing her to shards of light that scattered across the floor. The assembled heroes were shocked. Turalyon, champion of the light, who had fought the Legion for 1,000 years alongside the army of the light, was particularly enraged. He drew his blade against Illidan, demanding justice for Zera's death. Illidan caught Turalion's sword in his bare hand, his fell touched flesh, unharmed by the holy weapon. He spoke words that would be remembered long after the Legion's defeat. There can be no chosen one. Only we can save ourselves. The assault on the tomb of Sargeras was the culmination of everything the defenders of Azeroth had worked toward. The pillars of creation were assembled, their combined power capable of closing the massive portal that Gul'dan had opened. All that remained was to reach the portal and use them. The Legion Fall campaign brought together forces from across Azeroth. The class orders that had formed during the war, each led by champions wielding powerful artifact weapons, coordinated their efforts to establish a beachhead on the broken shore. The Kirin Tor provided magical support. The armies of Alliance and Horde, though still distrustful of each other after the events of the initial battle, fought side by side against the common enemy. The construction of the beachhead was itself an accomplishment worthy of memory. The broken shore was no ordinary battlefield, but a fragment of the broken, isles that had been utterly saturated with fell energy. The very earth was hostile, corrupted soil that burned exposed flesh and resisted conventional fortification. The sky above was perpetually darkened by the swirling energies of the portal, lightning crackling between clouds of ash and shadow. Engineers from both factions worked around the clock to establish defensive positions. They erected wards against demonic assault, built barricades from materials that could withstand a fell fire, and established supply lines that could maintain an army in hostile territory. The demons attacked constantly, probing for weaknesses, testing the defenses, trying to dislodge the mortal invaders before they could establish a firm foothold. The battle for the broken shore was a war of attrition unlike anything Azeroth had experienced. Casualties were measured not in hundreds, but in thousands, and every inch of ground was paid for in blood. The champions who led the assault understood that they were not just fighting for territory, but for the right to even attempt the assault on the tomb. Every demon slain was one fewer guardian at the gates. Every position captured was one more step closer to the portal. The tomb itself was a nightmare of demonic architecture and twisted magic. Chambers that had once been sacred to Elune were now defiled by fell corruption. Demons lurked in every shadow, their numbers seemingly endless, despite the losses they had suffered throughout the campaign. The champions fought their way through level after level, each floor presenting new challenges and new horrors. They faced the fallen Avatar, a construct created from the remains of Sargeras' avatar that Egwene had defeated millennia ago. They confronted Maiden of Vigilance, a titanic watcher corrupted by the fell energy that saturated the tomb. They battled through galleries of demons and constructs, each encounter draining their strength and testing their resolve. At the heart of the tomb waited Kil'jaeden. The Deceiver had been the architect of the Burning Legion's strategies for eons. Where Archimonde had been the fist of the Legion, Kil'jaeden had been its mind. He had manipulated the orcs into becoming tools of demon conquest, spending years studying their society and identifying the weaknesses that would allow him to corrupt them. He had sent Archimonde to lead the Third War, coordinating the invasion from the twisting nether while his fellow demon lord took the risks. He had overseen Gul'dan's mission to Azeroth, providing guidance and resources while remaining safely distant from the fighting. Kil'jaeden's history with Azeroth was personal. He had been present at the birth of the Draenei, had watched Velen lead his followers away from their doomed world. For 25,000 years, he had hunted the prophet across the cosmos, driving the Draenei from world to world, never allowing them to find true sanctuary. When the Draenei finally settled on Draenor, Kil'jaeden had followed, had corrupted the orcs, had used them as weapons against the people who had defied his master. The destruction of Draenor had been Kil'jaeden's doing. The war that shattered the world into Outland, the demons that poured through the dark portal, the suffering of millions of orcs and Draenei alike, all could be traced back to the deceiver's schemes. He had never forgiven Velen for escaping, had never forgiven the Draenei for choosing exile over submission. Every plan he made, every strategy he developed, was colored by that ancient grudge. Now he stood before the portal to Argus, determined to prevent the champions from closing the gateway that would doom the Legion's invasion. Behind him, the rift pulsed with Veil energy, a direct connection to the demon homeworld that represented everything the Burning Crusade had worked toward. If the champions closed that rift, the invasion would end. If they failed, demons would pour through until Azeroth was nothing but ash and shadow. The battle against Kil'jaeden was fought aboard his own command ship, suspended above a rift that led directly to the demon homeworld. The Deceiver wielded power that dwarfed anything the champions had faced before, his mastery of fell magic allowing him to reshape reality around him. He summoned darkness, called down fire from the sky, and attempted to hurl the champions into the rift that yawned beneath them. But the champions were not alone. Illidan Stormrage fought alongside them, his own power now fully restored. Khadgar provided magical support, his arcane might counteracting Kil'jaeden's most devastating attacks. The warriors of Azeroth worked together with perfect coordination, each member of the raid playing their role in the complex dance of combat. Kil'jaeden fell. The Deceiver, who had manipulated countless worlds to their doom, was destroyed at last. But his death did not close the portal. Instead, it left the way to Argus open, Oiseos, direct path to the heart of the Burning Legion's power. Illidan made a decision that would change everything. Using the Sargerite keystone that his demon hunters had recovered years ago, he tore open the rift even further. The sky above Azeroth split apart, revealing the massive form of Argus hanging in the heavens, visible to every creature on the planet. Velen and the other champions were horrified. Illidan had just created a permanent connection between Azeroth and the Legion's homeworld. The demons would no longer need to maintain a portal. They could simply travel the rift that now hung in the sky. But Illidan saw things differently. Sometimes the hand of fate must be forced, he declared. The rift worked both ways. If the demons could come to Azeroth, then the defenders of Azeroth could go to Argus. They could take the fight to the Legion's home, could strike at the source of demonic power, rather than simply defending against endless waves of invaders. It was a gamble on a cosmic scale, but then everything Illidan did was a gamble. He had bet his soul on the ability to fight the Legion from within. Now he was betting the fate of Azeroth on the ability to end the Legion once and for all. The campaign on Argus was unlike anything Azeroth had ever attempted. The Vindicar, a massive Draenei vessel designed for interstellar travel, carried the champions across the void to the demon world. The ship had been built in secret over centuries, a project of the Draenei artificers who never stopped hoping for a day when they might return to their homeworld. Now that day had come, though not in the manner they had imagined. The journey through the rift was a passage through madness. The space between Azeroth and Argus was not normal void, but the twisting nether itself, a realm of chaotic energies where demons were born and reborn endlessly. The Vindicar's shields strained against the hostile environment, its light-forged defenses the only thing, standing between the champions and dissolution into raw chaos. When they emerged above Argus, the sight that greeted them was both beautiful and terrible. The planet hung in the sky like a corrupted jewel, its surface glowing with fell green and shadow purple. Once blue oceans had boiled away or become pools of toxic sludge. Mountains that had stood for millions of years were twisted into shapes that defied natural geometry. This was what a world looked like after 25,000 years of demonic occupation. There they found a planet utterly consumed by fell corruption, its surface scarred by millennia of demonic industry. Great forges pumped out weapons and armor for the Legion's armies. Soul engines processed the spirits of conquered worlds, feeding their essence into the burning Crusade's war machine. The sky itself was wrong, filled with constant lightning and the distant shapes of Legion vessels patrolling their home space. Argus had once been the homeworld of this Illidari, the same race that had given rise to the Draenei. When Sargeras had come to corrupt the Illidari leaders, most of the population had accepted his offer of power. Those who refused, led by Velen, had fled and eventually become the Draenei. Those who accepted had become the demons known as the Minari, the ruling class of the Burning Legion. Walking on Argus was walking through the ruins of Draenei civilization. Shattered temples and defiled monuments marked the landscape, reminders of what the Illidari had been before Sargeras twisted them into something unrecognizable. For Velen, who had fled this world 25,000 years ago, the sight was both painful and vindicating. He had been right to run. He had been right to never give up hope that one day his people would return to reclaim their home. The champions established bases in 3 regions of Argus. Crokun was the first beachhead, a relatively less corrupted area where the Army of the Light had been fighting a guerrilla war against the Legion for centuries. There they encountered Turalyon and Illyria Windrunner, legendary heroes of the Second War, who had disappeared through a rift during the invasion of Draenor decades ago. Turalyon had become a champion of the light, his mortal form transformed by years of exposure to the Naru's holy energy. He and his army of the light had been fighting an impossible war against the Legion across the cosmos, striking at demon worlds wherever they could, knowing that they could never truly win, but refusing to surrender. Illyria had taken a different path. The void whispered to her, offering power that the light could not provide. She had learned to wield shadow magic, becoming a being of both light and darkness. Her relationship with Turalyon was strained by their different choices, but their love had survived even the cosmic gulf between their powers. The reunion between these legendary heroes and the champions of Azeroth was bittersweet. Turalyon and Ilaria had believed their homeworld lost, had assumed that the Legion had claimed it long ago. To learn that Azeroth had not only survived, but had driven back multiple invasions, filled them with hope they had thought long dead. But they also saw how much had changed, how many of those they had known and loved had passed away while they were frozen in the timeless light. Turalyon's transformation had been gradual. Exposure to the Naru over centuries had infused his body with holy energy until he was more light than mortal. His skin glowed faintly, his eyes blazed with golden radiance, and his lifespan had been extended far beyond human norms. He had become something between man and angel, a champion of the light in the truest sense. Alaria's journey had been darker. She had heard the whispers of the void during her time with the army of the light, had felt something reaching out to her from the darkness between stars. Rather than resist, she had sought to understand, to master this power as another weapon against the Legion. The result had transformed her into a void elf, the first of her kind, able to call upon shadows that terrified even the demons. The tension between their powers was constant. Light and void were fundamental opposites, forces that could not easily coexist. When Turalyon and Ilaria stood too close, their energies crackled and sparked, threatening to annihilate each other. They had learned to maintain a careful distance, to channel their feelings into brief moments together, rather than the constant companionship they had once enjoyed. Mak'ari was the second region, once a center of Eridar civilization, and now a haunted ruin. The champions discovered the seat of the triumvirate there, the place where Archimond, Kil'jaeden, and Velen had once ruled together. They also found Eridar who had resisted the corruption, souls who had managed to maintain their sanity despite millennia of demonic influence. These Wakeners became unexpected allies, their knowledge of Argus proving invaluable. The Antoran Wastes were the heart of the Legion's power, home to their greatest forges and most powerful commanders. The world soul of Argus slept beneath this region, corrupted by Sargeras' touch and slowly being transformed into something terrible. The champions learned that the Legion intended to use Argus's world soul as a weapon, to birth a titan of pure destruction that would sweep across the cosmos. Antorus, the burning throne, was the final fortress of the Legion. This was no mere citadel, but a structure of cosmic significance, a palace built around the corrupted world soul of Argus. The Legion had poured their greatest efforts into its construction, creating defenses that had never been breached in the 25,000 years of their occupation. Within its halls, the champions would face their greatest challenges and make their ultimate sacrifices. Every demon of note who had survived the war so far was gathered here, determined to protect the heart of their power. The champions were not just fighting for Azeroth anymore. They were fighting to end the burning crusade itself, to cut off the head of the serpent that had threatened the cosmos for eons. The assault on Antorus was coordinated across multiple fronts. The Army of the Light provided support from their vessels, bombarding demon positions and distracting defensive forces. The Draenei who had accompanied the champions fought alongside them, their hatred for the Legion given focus after millennia of fleeing. The demon hunters of the Illidari used their knowledge of demonic tactics to exploit weaknesses in the fortress's defenses. The raid began at the gates, where massive demon constructs guarded the entrance. The champions fought through wave after wave of defenders, each chamber presenting new threats and new obstacles. They faced the fellhounds of Sargeras, beasts bred for war. They confronted the Antoran High Command, generals who had orchestrated the destruction of countless worlds. They destroyed the Eonar, a machine designed to corrupt the Titan of Life herself. Deeper within the throne, they discovered the imprisoned Titan Pantheon. The Titans who had shaped the universe had been captured by Sargeras, their spirits held in eternal torment. Only Agrimar remained active, his form corrupted and turned against his former allies. The champions freed the spirits of the Pantheon, allowing them to aid in the final confrontation. Varian waited in the throne's depths, the dreadlord who had served so many masters over the millennia. His torture chambers still held prisoners, victims of unspeakable cruelties. The champions destroyed him, freeing what souls could still be saved. And finally, at the very heart of Antorus, they faced Argus the Unmaker. The tragedy of Argus was the tragedy of all world souls corrupted by Sargeras. In the beginning, Argus had been like Azeroth, a nascent titan sleeping within a planet, slowly growing toward the consciousness that would one day allow it to join the Pantheon. The Eridar had lived upon its surface without knowing what slumbered beneath them, their civilization flourishing under the light of stars that had watched over them since the dawn of time. When Sargeras fell to despair and began his burning crusade, he recognized Argus for what it was. A world soul was the most valuable prize in the cosmos, a being of such power that it could reshape reality itself. Rather than destroy Argus, Sargeras decided to corrupt it, to turn what should have been a force for creation into a weapon of annihilation. For 25,000 years, the Dark Titan had poured fell energy into Argus's slumbering form. The process was slow, patient, methodical. Sargeras could not rush the corruption without risking the world soul's destruction, and he wanted Argus alive. He wanted a fellow Titan, one that shared his vision of a universe purged of life, one that would stand beside him in the final battle against the void. The world soul of Argus had been corrupted beyond recognition. Sargeras had poured fell energy into it for eons, twisting what should have been a titan of creation into a being of pure destruction. When the champions arrived, the transformation was nearly complete. Argus rose from his slumber, a colossus of shadow and flame, determined to unmake everything the Titans had created. The battle against Argus was fought across dimensions. The champions were drawn into the seat of the Pantheon, a realm between realities where the freed Titans had gathered. There, with the Pantheon's aid, they fought the corrupted world soul, matching their mortal strength against the power of a being that should have been a god. They died. Every champion who faced Argus fell at least once, their souls sent to the realm between life and death. The experience of death in the seat of the Pantheon was unlike anything the champions had experienced before. There was no tunnel of light, no peaceful passage to an afterlife. There was only the vast emptiness of the spaces between realities, the cold certainty of ending, and then the pull of the Pantheon's power, drawing them back. The Titans' intervention was not simply resurrection. They were sharing their own essence with the champions, transferring fragments of cosmic power that mortal frames were never designed to contain. Each death and return pushed the champions closer to their limits, their bodies straining under energies that could have torn them apart. But they endured, fueled by determination and the knowledge that failure meant the end of everything. Argus's attacks grew more desperate as the battle continued. The corrupted world soul sensed its own mortality, felt the champions chipping away at its defenses, and responded with devastating strikes that demolished entire sections of the arena. Reality warped around, the combatants, space folding in on itself as Argus tried to crush the insignificant beings who dared to challenge a Titan. But the Titans were not finished with them. The Pantheon pulled the champions back from the brink, restored their strength, gave them the power to continue fighting. Each resurrection came with a surge of energy, a gift from the cosmos itself, channeled through beings who had shaped the universe in its infancy. Argus fell. The corrupted world soul was destroyed, its power scattered across the cosmos. In its final moments, the entity that might have been a god showed something that might have been relief. It had been twisted and tortured for 25,000 years, its consciousness warped into something unrecognizable. Death was not a defeat for Argus, but a release, an end to suffering that had lasted longer than most civilizations existed. The Burning Crusade, which had claimed countless worlds and trillions of lives over millions of years, was finally over. But Sargeras was not defeated. The Dark Titan appeared in the sky above Argus, his massive form blotting out the stars. He had been waiting, watching, preparing to personally oversee the final victory of his legion. Now that victory was snatched away, and he would not accept defeat. Sargeras reached toward Azeroth, his hand descending toward the planet that had defied him so many times. If he could not claim the world soul within, he would destroy it. If he could not corrupt Azeroth, he would ensure that no one else could have it either. His rage was the rage of the being who had devoted millions of years to a single purpose, only to see that purpose thwarted. Sargeras had believed himself righteous, had convinced himself that his crusade was necessary to save the universe from a fate worse than death. He had sacrificed everything, had turned his back on his fellow Titans, had become the very monster he had once fought against. And now mortals, insignificant, creatures whose entire civilizations were but moments in his existence, had destroyed his greatest creation and killed his most loyal servants. The Dark Titan's form was beyond mortal comprehension, a being of such size that entire planets were but pebbles in his presence. His sword stretched for miles, a blade forged in the heart of a dying sun and quenched in the blood of worlds. His eyes burned with the accumulated hatred of eons, fixed upon the small blue planet that had defied him 3 times and would not do so again. The Pantheon acted. The freed Titans combined their power, creating chains of cosmic energy that wrapped around Sargeras' form. They began to drag him away from Azeroth, pulling him toward the seat of the Pantheon, where he would be imprisoned for eternity. But Sargeras was the mightiest of the Titans, and he would not go quietly. In his final moment of freedom, he drove his sword into the heart of Azeroth. The massive blade, miles long and wreathed in fire, plunged through the atmosphere and buried itself in the continent of Sylvanas. The wound was catastrophic. The world soul within Azeroth began to bleed, its essence pouring out through the gash that Sargeras had created. The planet itself screamed in agony, its pain felt by every being with connection to the land. And then Sargeras was gone, dragged to his prison by his fellow Titans. The rift in the sky closed behind him, sealing Argus away from Azeroth and ending the direct connection between the worlds. The champions, who witnessed the imprisonment, were changed by what they had seen. They had watched gods do battle, had seen forces that shaped the cosmos unleashed in furious combat. They had fought alongside the Pantheon, the architects of reality itself, and had contributed to a victory that would echo through eternity. None of them would ever be the same. The journey back to Azeroth was subdued. The Vindicar's corridors, which had echoed with the sounds of preparation and battle during the campaign, were now quiet. Champions walked the halls in reflection, processing what they had experienced, mourning what they had lost. They had won, but victory felt hollow in the shadow of Sargeras' final strike. When they emerged from the rift and saw Azeroth hanging in space before them, marred by the massive wound in Sylvanas, the reality of their situation became clear. They had saved the world from the Legion, but the world had paid a terrible price. The work of healing would take years, perhaps decades, and the azurite that bled from the wound promised new conflicts to come. But someone had to ensure that Sargeras remained imprisoned. Someone had to stand watch over the Dark Titan for eternity, ensuring that he never escaped to threaten the cosmos again. Illidan volunteered. The demon hunter had spent his entire existence fighting the Legion. He had sacrificed his eyes, his freedom, his reputation, his very soul in pursuit of this goal. Now he would make the final sacrifice. He would remain at the seat of the Pantheon, standing before Sargeras' throne, blades in hand, ready to fight the Dark Titan for all eternity if necessary. He left behind a message crystal for his brother Malfurion and Tyrande, the woman who had once been his heart's desire. He explained his choice, his acceptance of this final duty. He had no regrets. Everything he had done in his life had led to this moment. The crystal contained more than simple words. It held glimpses of Illidan's memories, moments that had shaped him into the being he had become. His first sight of Tyrande when they were young and the world was full of possibility. His discovery of Druidism alongside his brother before their paths diverged. The moment he chose to pursue arcane magic instead, believing that the greater power justified the greater risk. He showed them the sacrifice of his eyes when he had gazed into the demonic flames and traded his sight for spectral vision. He showed them his imprisonment, the 10,000 years of solitude in which his only companions were darkness and his own thoughts. He showed them the skull of Gul'dan and the transformation that followed, the agony of becoming something more than mortal and less than whole. He showed them, finally, his love, the love that had never dimmed despite rejection and misunderstanding, the love that had driven him to acts of seeming betrayal, all in pursuit of a future where Tyrande and Malfurion could live in peace. He had never stopped caring, had never stopped hoping that one day they would understand. The message ended with a simple statement. I have always been alone, but I was never lonely when I thought of you. Take care of each other. I will hold the line here as I have always held it against the darkness that threatens everything. And he left a message for the champions who had fought beside him. The future of Azeroth was in their hands now. They would need to deal with what came next, with the wound that Sargeras had left in their world, with the threats that remained even after the Legion's defeat. Illidan's war was over. Theirs was just beginning. The aftermath of the Legion's defeat brought both celebration and grief. The Burning Crusade was ended. The threat that had haunted the cosmos for millions of years finally contained. Sargeras was imprisoned, Gul'dan destroyed, the demon armies shattered. It was a victory beyond anything Azeroth had ever achieved. The celebrations that erupted across Azeroth were unlike anything in living memory. In Stormwind, bells that had not rung since the Third War pealed out across the city, their tones echoing off stone walls that had stood against threats both mortal and demonic. In Orgrimmar, the drums of victory thundered through the night, accompanied by chants that honored the warriors who had fallen and those who had survived. In every city, every town, every village, across the world, people gathered to celebrate the impossible. They had won, not just survived, not just endured, but won. The Burning Legion, which had conquered countless worlds, which had been the nightmare of every civilization in the cosmos, had been defeated by the mortals of Azeroth. It was a triumph that would be remembered for generations, a story that would be told around fires and in grand halls for as long as there were people to tell it. But the cost had been immense. Varian, Rin, and Vol'jin had fallen at the broken shore. Ysera had been corrupted and destroyed. Zera had been shattered by the very champion she had tried to guide. Countless soldiers and adventurers had given their lives across the campaign's many battles. And then there was the sword. Sargeras's blade jutted from the sands of Silithus like a monument to cosmic malice. The region around it was devastated, transformed into a wasteland of corrupted earth and dying vegetation. The world soul's blood, a substance called azurite, seeped from the wound in quantities that drew the attention of every faction on Azeroth. Azurite proved to be the most powerful magical substance ever discovered. It could enhance weapons, empower artifacts, fuel magical constructs of unprecedented strength. Whoever controlled the Azurite supply would possess an advantage that could reshape the balance of power across the world. The Alliance and Horde, which had fought together against the Legion despite their mutual distrust, now found themselves eyeing each other across the crater in Silithus. The unity that had been forged in desperation began to crumble as both factions realized the strategic implications of the Azurite deposits. The old grievances that had been set aside during the invasion resurfaced almost immediately. The Alliance remembered the broken shore, remembered the moment when the Horde horns sounded retreat while their soldiers died below. They did not know about Vol'jin's wound, did not understand that Sylvanas' decision had saved the Horde from total destruction. They saw only abandonment, only the bitter taste of what they perceived as betrayal. The Horde, for its part, remembered 1,000 insults and injustices stretching back to the internment camps that had held their people after the Second War. They remembered the siege of Orgrimmar during the campaign against Garrosh, when Alliance forces had marched through their capital. They remembered every time the Alliance had treated them as monsters rather than people, every instance when the noble rhetoric of human kingdoms had masked the simple desire to see the Horde destroyed. Sylvanas Windrunner, still Warchief of the Horde despite the doubts of many, began making plans that would lead to new conflicts. Anduin Wrynn, now fully grown into his role as High King, prepared for the possibility of renewed war. The seeds of the next great conflict were already being planted, even as the celebrations of victory continued. The artifact weapons that had served the champions throughout the campaign were depleted by the final battle. The power that had sustained them against the Legion was drained, leaving behind relics that were merely powerful rather than legendary. The champions would need to find new sources of strength for the challenges to come, and somewhere in the cosmos, at the seat of the Pantheon, Illidan Stormrage stood watch. His war against the demons was over, but his vigil would last for eternity. He faced Sargeras' imprisoned form, his fell blazing eyes meeting the Dark Titan's gaze, two beings locked in an eternal standoff. The betrayer had become the jailer. The demon hunter who had been reviled by his own people had saved those people from annihilation. His sacrifice would be remembered, though perhaps not understood, for generations to come. The story of Legion is one of sacrifice and redemption, of heroes who fell and heroes who rose. It is the tale of how the Burning Crusade, which had threatened the cosmos since before Azeroth was formed, finally came to an end. The themes of the expansion resonated deeply with those who lived through it. The importance of unity in the face of overwhelming threat. The need to set aside old grievances when survival itself was at stake. The courage required to face impossible odds and fight anyway, not because victory was certain, but because the alternative was unacceptable. Legion also explored the nature of sacrifice. Every major character in the story gave something up in pursuit of victory. Varian gave his life so that his soldiers could escape. Vol'jin gave his authority, passing the mantle of Warchief to someone he hoped would lead the Horde to safety. Ysera gave her sanity, corrupted by the nightmare, until death was the only release. And Illidan gave his freedom, accepting eternal vigil over Sargeras as the final expression of his lifelong war against the demons. These sacrifices were not meaningless. Each one contributed to the ultimate victory, building toward a climax that could not have been achieved any other way. The champions who fought through the expansion learned that heroism was not about individual glory, but about contributing to something larger than oneself. They learned that the difference between victory and defeat often came down to the willingness to pay costs that others could not bear. Gul'dan came to Azeroth as the Legion's champion, and he died at the hands of the being he had tried to enslave. Varian Wrynn gave his life so that others might escape, his final act a testament to the courage that had defined his reign. Vol'jin passed the mantle of Warchief to Sylvanas, setting in motion events that would reshape the Horde for years to come. Illidan Stormrage, the betrayer, proved that betrayal can sometimes be the highest form of loyalty. He betrayed the expectations of those who would have controlled him, choosing his own path rather than accepting a destiny written by others. In the end, he chose to serve as Sargeras' jailer, the final act in a life defined by impossible choices. The defenders of Azeroth faced challenges that would have broken lesser beings. They fought across the Broken Isles, recovering artifacts of Titan power. They liberated the Nightborn from Legion control. They stormed the tomb of Sargeras and destroyed Kil'jaeden. They traveled to Argus itself and ended the Burning Crusade at its source. And when Sargeras sought to destroy what he could not corrupt, They watched as the Pantheon dragged him away, knowing that Illidan would stand watch over him for eternity. The war was over. But as the wound in Silithus bled Azerite into the world, as Alliance and Horde began to eye each other with renewed suspicion, it was clear that peace would not last. The Legion was defeated, but new threats were already emerging. The world soul of Azeroth was injured, and the loss consequences of that injury would shape events for years to come. The Nightborn would eventually join the Horde, their gratitude for the Blood Elves' assistance during the rebellion leading them to ally with Silvermoon rather than Darnassus. The High Mountain Tauren would follow, finding kinship with the Tauren of Kalimdor. The Void Elves, led by Ilaria Windrunner, would join the Alliance, bringing their mastery of shadow magic to serve their former homeland. The Light-Forged Draenei would do the same, their millennia of warfare against the Legion making them natural allies for the Alliance's campaigns. These new allies would play important roles in the conflicts to come. The Fourth War would erupt between Alliance and Horde, fueled by Azerite and old hatreds. The burning of Teldrassil would shock the world. The siege of Lordaeron would answer in kind. The cycle of violence that the Legion's invasion had briefly interrupted would resume with terrible intensity, but those are stories for another night. The tale of Legion stands complete, a chronicle of the darkest hour and the triumph that followed. It is the story of how Azeroth faced annihilation and refused to fall, of how mortals challenged gods and emerged victorious. For now, though, let the tale of Legion settle over you like a warm blanket. Let the battles and the heroes, the sacrifices and the victories drift through your thoughts as sleep approaches. The demons have been driven back. The Dark Titan is imprisoned. The champions rest, at least for a time, their duty done and their honor intact. The story of Legion is also a story of closure. Illidan's arc, which began in Warcraft III with his betrayal and imprisonment, finally reached its conclusion. The demon hunter who had been misunderstood, reviled, and hunted found a purpose that validated all his sacrifices. He did not become what others wanted him to be. He became what he chose to be, a guardian against the darkness, a watcher at the edge of eternity. Varian Wryn's story also found its end on the broken shore. The king who had lost everything and rebuilt himself through sheer will died as he lived, fighting for his people until his final breath. His son Anduin would carry his legacy forward, shaped by his father's example, but finding his own path as a leader who valued peace as much as war. Vol'jin's death was more mysterious, guided by spirits whose motives remained unclear. His choice of Sylvanas as his successor would have consequences that shook the Horde to its foundations. But that is a tale for another night, another story in the endless saga of Azeroth. The Burning Legion, which had threatened the cosmos since before mortal memory, was finally broken. Millions of years of conquest and destruction ended at the seat of the Pantheon, where mortals and titans stood together against the dark. The demons that had once seemed unstoppable were scattered, leaderless, their purpose destroyed along with their masters. The implications of this victory extended far beyond Azeroth. Countless worlds that had lived in fear of the Legion could finally know peace. Species that had been on the verge of extinction could begin to rebuild. The twisting nether itself, that chaotic realm between worlds, where demons had regenerated endlessly, would no longer spawn new horrors to threaten the universe. The cosmos was forever changed by what Azeroth's champions had accomplished. The Draenei, who had fled the Legion for 25,000 years, could finally stop running. Velen had lived long enough to see his ancient enemy defeated, to know that his people's exodus had not been in vain. The prophet had kept faith through millennia of suffering, and that faith had been rewarded at last. For the demon hunters, the victory was bittersweet. They had sacrificed everything to become weapons against the Legion, and now that war was over. Some would struggle to find new purpose. Others would continue to hunt the remnants of demonic forces scattered across the cosmos. But none of them would ever forget what they had given up or what they had helped achieve. And through it all, the champions of Azeroth proved that courage and determination could triumph over even cosmic evil. They were not gods or titans or beings of ancient power. They were mortals, people who chose to fight even when the odds seemed impossible, who refused to surrender even when all seemed lost. Their example would inspire generations to come. Somewhere in the stars, Illidan stands eternal vigil. His blades are drawn, his eyes blaze with fell fire, and he watches Sargeras with the patience of one who has already given everything. If the Dark Titan stirs, if he attempts to break his bonds, Illidan will be there. He made his choice, and he does not regret it. This is what he was born for. This is what all his sacrifices led to. The betrayer stands as the ultimate guardian, forever watching, forever ready. On Azeroth, life continues. Cities are rebuilt. Wounds are tended. The living mourn the dead and find reasons to carry on. The world has survived its greatest trial, and though scars remain, hope endures. The temples that had been desecrated are being cleansed. The forests that had been corrupted are slowly healing. The bonds between races and factions, forged in the heat of shared struggle, remain strong even as old tensions resurface. The friendships made in battle, the respect earned through sacrifice, these things do not disappear simply because the war is over. In Dalaran, the mages continue their research, seeking ways to heal the wound in Silithus and protect the world soul from further harm. In Darnassus and Orgrimmar, in Stormwind and Thunderbluff, leaders plan for futures that now seem possible because of what their people accomplished. Children are born who will never know the fear of demonic invasion, who will grow up in a world shaped by the victories their parents won. The veterans of the Legion War carry their memories with them, the weight of what they saw and did forever, part of who they are. Some find peace in quiet lives, their adventuring days behind them. Others cannot rest, driven to continue protecting the world they nearly lost. All of them are changed, marked by experiences that few can truly understand. Remember that as you drift toward dreams. Remember the heroes who crossed the void to end an ancient evil. Remember the choices that made the difference between destruction and salvation. Remember that even in the darkest times, when all seems lost and the enemy appears unstoppable, there are those who will stand and fight. They are the champions of Azeroth. And though their story continues in new chapters and new conflicts, tonight we celebrate what they achieved in Legion. They ended the Burning Crusade. They saved the world. That is something worth remembering. The legacy of Legion extends beyond the defeat of the Burning Crusade. It marked the return of Illidan Stormrage, a figure who had been villain and hero in equal measure throughout Warcraft's history. It saw the deaths of two beloved leaders and the rise of new ones who would shape the conflicts to come. It introduced the Demon Hunters as a playable force, warriors who chose to sacrifice everything for the power to protect their world. The expansion also explored themes that resonated deeply with players: the nature of sacrifice and what we are willing to give up for victory, the question of destiny and whether we are bound by prophecy or free to forge our own paths, the importance of unity and how even ancient enemies can find common ground when faced with extinction. The wounds left by the Legion invasion, both physical and emotional, would continue to shape Azeroth for years to come. The sword in Sylvanas became a monument to both triumph and tragedy, a reminder that victory often comes with costs that cannot be fully calculated until long after the battle is won. Thank you for joining us here at World of Sleepcraft. If you enjoyed this journey through the Legion expansion, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating these tales of Warcraft lore for your peaceful nights. The saga of Azeroth spans countless adventures, from the ancient past to the uncertain future. There are always more stories to tell, more heroes to remember, more battles to relive in the quiet hours before sleep claims us. Until next time, may your dreams be filled with adventure, and may you wake refreshed and ready for whatever challenges await. Sleep well, champion,